Yes, the official book interview. Very excited to have you. Congratulations on the book. You've already done several high-profile interviews. I'm very happy just to get you on the show. What a big get it is for us. How not to invest, the ideas, numbers, and behaviors that destroy wealth and how to avoid them. What has been the reception? I was at the book party. There's a lot of big wigs there. You've been on all these big shows. How are you feeling? It's been out for what, a couple weeks?
2 weeks, yeah. Very gratified. The reception has been really positive. I was trying to strike a tone that was a little lighter than Bailout Nation, a little more conversational, and without wagging my finger at people, just trying to sneak the lessons in by making it a little fun, and hopefully I hit that mark.
Well, you definitely did, according to me. Well, what the hell do I know? You have been sitting down with all kinds of big guests, big interviewers. I just saw your interview with Scott Galloway. That was a little too in the weeds for me with you and him. So we gotta dumb it down a little bit for me. But I feel like the book does that. I feel like he brought it up a notch from the book because the book is for all of us, I would say.
Yeah, the dumbing it down is sort of the wrong phrase I would think use kind of bring to me. It's about just making things accessible. I will tell you, having spent my whole professional career trying to explain stuff to my mom, who's a real estate agent, to my wife, who's a fashion illustrator and design and art teacher. Like, if I can make them understand finance, then any layperson can. And what I learned over I want to say years, but it's really decades, is that the further you go outside of mathy economic analysis and quantitative data crunching to like stories that
Yes.
people can relate to, the easier it is for them to grasp the takeaway. So probably the single best example of that is Wall Street, finance, financial television, media. They spend a lot of time forecasting what's going to happen in the future. There's a ton of speculation. There's a ton of opinion mongering. There's just like a lot of nonsense, and I found that by going to Hollywood, going to TV, movies, music, and show how little the professionals know about what's coming next, we all can relate to that. Like when you stop and say, wait, the major studios all passed on E.T., they passed on Star Wars, they passed on Raiders of the Lost Ark. A beloved film, Princess Bride, couldn't get made because no one believed it. And then, of course, the reviews of the Beatles' first appearance on Ed Sullivan, they're hilarious because, anytime something innovative comes along that is groundbreaking, people who came of age in a different era have a really hard time adjusting to that.
I think it's a great point. I strike, dumb it down, and I change it to making it more accessible. That's what your book does. But you're not supposed to have a title of a book that's like a negative, how not to invest. The title's supposed to be how to invest. Most books are in this category are what to do with your money, how to invest, or some variation of that. And not only is it a bad title, but it's also a bad practice to do what you've always done, which is to point to all of the wrong things and debunk myths. And as you said, nobody knows anything. No experts about movies or music knows anything. So it's kind of like you've been playing this role of critic in a way, but you're doing it in kind of proving what not to do often, and including your own mistakes, right? Did I have that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's exactly right. And the funny thing is, look, it's been 15 years since Bailout Nation, and over the ensuing, decade and a half, I had a lot of friends, family, publishers, other writers say, "Hey, when's the next book?" And my answer was always, "I'm kind of busy building the firm, working with my colleagues, and besides, there's been a million how to invest books." And people are still like for a century, 100 of them come out a year, and no, everybody is still a pretty mediocre investor. Why don't we need another garbage how-to book to throw in the pile? And I came home from vacation You know that sort of dead zone between Christmas and New Year's?
Oh yeah,
I
we call
can't.
it the taint week. I named it.
The perineum week. I came home and I had a couple of days to kill before everybody goes back to the office in January 2nd. And Morgan Housel had been nagging me. You really should do a book. It'll be so easy. And I just start looking through the quarterly calls I do for clients, the notes I've sent out, to say nothing of specific commentaries and analyses and columns. And I definitely noticed a pattern, which was I spent a lot of time debunking a lot of bullshit.
Right.
So I started here. Take a look at this. This was on my bulletin board, which is now just covered with other crap. But these were on my bulletin board. I just started writing ideas down and posting.
For those listening, is a whole bunch of index cards with your writing on.
Right, 3x5 cards. Some are green, some are pink, and I would put like the book is broken down into 4 sections. Each of the first 3 sections, bad ideas, bad numbers, bad behavior, are broken down into 3 subsections, and when each of those are a dozen really short chapters, page and a half, 2 pages.
Yep.
They're fast and easy to read. The book looks intimidating because of its size, but there's a lot of white space in there. There's a lot of blank half pages.
Yeah,
I had to argue with the publisher. They wanted to start each chapter in the middle of the page. I'm like, it'll be 900 pages long. You got to start it at the top. So we saved some trees doing that. But once I started putting these on the board, the organizational structure kind of revealed itself, because when you think of mistakes, errors, bad decisions, they really fell neatly into these 3 things. We believe stuff that's nonsense. We don't understand the numbers that underlie investing, both to the upside in terms of how compounding works and to the downside, how frequently markets engage in volatility. And then lastly, we exhibit really terrible behavior. And so if we could just not do those 3 things, we would all be so much better off.
There's too much advice out there. There's too many get-rich-quick ideas, channels, books. There has been, as long as there's been money. Bad ideas, bad numbers, bad behavior. Section 4 of the book is good advice. So it gets, in the end, it takes a turn where you're not as much criticizing all of the things that people get wrong and then telling people what you've gotten right.
Yeah, that's the plot twist, is at the very end, 10 short chapters. All right, I've just spent 377 pages telling you what not to do. Here are 10 things to do, and if you can do these, you'll be much better off. And by the way, these are the things that we do in the office when we're managing money for clients.
I feel like one of the most important questions you ask, and by the way, just going to the end of the book, good advice, is how disciplined are you? So if you're talking about investments, you have to have some discipline, which means not to bite the hook, take the bait, get distracted. And that's really hard to do if you're paying close attention, I suppose, to your money. And as well, if you think you know a thing or two. So that's not me. I don't pay much attention and I don't know anything, but it's a lot of investors that think, they've read a lot, they've experienced a lot, they're paying close attention. And so they know a lot, but the question of discipline is something that can be applied to not only your investments, but all sectors of life, I suppose. Tell me about what you mean here.
Yeah. So first, a lot of that thematically comes from, I recall being on vacation in Puerto Rico in a place that was a beautiful beach. I think it was El Dorado, something like that. But not a lot of internet. And I purposefully, when I go on vacation, I want to sit on the beach and read, maybe do a little sailing or snorkeling, but just unplug for a week. And so I was not very tapped into what was happening in the market, but I always feel like I should just check in to see what's happening. And so with limited internet, I would just flick on the TV and put on financial television for, 15 minutes, 20 minutes each morning. And I was aghast at what I saw. I was genuinely shocked at the degree of just frippery and tomfoolery. I'm reaching back centuries for those words, but the sort of, you don't realize how much of what passes for news is really opinion, speculation, guesswork, forecasting. I feel, I think, I hope. It's like, no, just tell me what the fuck is going on. Stop sharing your hopes and dreams. That doesn't help me. And so, I came of age in this industry on a trading desk where there was always multiple TVs on to all of the financial channels, but usually muted. And so I kind of forgot what that was like to actually see how these things affect people. We've talked about this before in 08, 09. I recall flipping on the TV and saying, we got to be getting close to a bottom because they're running around with their hair on fire like the world's coming to an end. And, once you kind of realize how emotionally influential media can be, you have to take some steps to protect yourself from the worst of it. That doesn't mean just don't read any news and shut everything off. Just be aware that everybody is selling you something, and you have to ask, what are they selling, and what's the cost of buying these things?
Talk about the media. You just mentioned it there. You have a chapter in part one called, is it Media Madness? Yeah.
Yeah.
And, we've talked about this over the years a lot, especially the 24, CNBC and Fox Business, Bloomberg, and any
CNN,
any network that needs to be on 24 hours, needs content, needs material. We can talk about the good, we can talk about the bad. But let's just talk about the elephant in the room. It's you. Your entire business model, market, and branding has a lot to do with the media that you've been a part of or that you created yourself, specifically your blog, obviously, which is a written form, your articles, and so on. You've appeared on all of these networks. You have your own podcast. Your partners have a podcast, YouTube channels, etc. You are the financial media. So go ahead and criticize it.
Well, yes and no. Most of just about everything we have created over the years has been, and by the way, this dates back to the late 90s and 2000s, a decade plus before I had a wealth management firm. It was always a pushback to, this is wrong. I recall getting into an argument with the editors of the Wall Street Journal in 05 or 06. I don't even remember the exact date, trying to explain that no, housing isn't getting better from March to April to May. That's seasonal. It gets better every year. Instead, look at it year over year, and you could say, is April 2006 better than April 2005? Not, consistently. Housing sales bottom in December, January, and they peak in June, July. And there's a reason for that. People want to get into the new school district before the new school year starts, so their kid doesn't start in the middle of the year and kind of feels like an outsider. So it's very seasonal, and if you don't understand that, there's a reason we don't freak out over the unemployment numbers every December 26th. Hey, guess what? All these retailers hired a bunch of people for Christmas sales because depending on the product, it's 30, 40% of annual sales, and they do all the layoffs in January. We don't lose our shit because suddenly, oh my God, unemployment spiked. No, it's seasonal. And the fact that I couldn't get editors to understand that is because they at least they used to be. They also used to be, English and creative writing majors, and very few of them studied, forget economics or business, just probabilities and statistical analysis and basic math. That has changed over the past 20 years. I've been finding that the average, what they used to do is take a junior person and throw them. You're covering the Fed. Now it's a really senior person that covers the Fed. But back in the day, it was like they would send you to the Federal Reserve ghetto to earn your stripes, and then you had to progress to a more interesting subject. So I've sent, I spent a lot of my time on the blog. The blog started in 98 on GeoCities, TypePad in 2003, and then it moved to WordPress in '08, which is where it's happily been ensconced. When I started the podcast in 2014, I had been writing for the Washington Post. And by the way, in all of these episodes, there is frequent criticism of the media because I didn't think they consistently did a great job. There was an acknowledgement of errors. I was doing with the Washington Post, I would do a mea culpa every year. Here's what I got wrong this year, and here's what I learned from it. And I'm on both sides of the media microphone. Sometimes I'm a creator of content, and sometimes I'm a consumer of content. And wearing both of those hats gives me some insight into media that perhaps not everybody has. And here's the crazy thing. As much as I'm critical of print and TV and radio, I'm a big fan of those things, especially my favorite writers, broadcasters. Yeah. Because when someone does a really good job with that, it's incredibly helpful. And the problem is 9 out of 10 of, to quote Theodore Sturgeon, famous science fiction writer of the 50s, defending sci-fi, someone said, how come so much science fiction is bad? He's like, 90% of everything is crap.
Right.
And that's a pretty good guideline. So I have a run of my favorite writers and researchers and analysts and economists and people who have demonstrated they have a process, they're thoughtful, they've been through a few cycles, they didn't just get lucky once throwing a dart. Their approach, hey, no one's perfect, but they're more right than wrong. And even when they're wrong, they own it and they move on.
You say in this first part, bad ideas, lose the news and just listen to TikTok investors. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. He doesn't want you to listen to TikTok investors, but connect the two. And then this is one of my favorite sections of the book, because then you document all kinds of media stories, narratives, even magazine covers that clearly got it wrong. It's easy now to look back and see how wrong they got it. Why the Apple Store will fail. Forget the iPhone. BlackBerry is still the one to beat. And can anyone catch Nokia? And I think if anybody knows anybody, they know that at least two of those brands I just mentioned are no really longer around very much. So talk to me about how we lose the news and who not to listen to, and how these big, high-profile media outlets get a lot of things wrong. In retrospect, it's easy to see. Maybe not.
So the key takeaway is we all get stuff wrong all the time. And that's the whole concept of the book, is just make fewer mistakes and you're way better off. I'll talk about Charlie Ellis in a minute, but it's funny. A lot of the stuff I wrote early in my career, no one knew who the hell I was. It wasn't until I more or less got the financial crisis right, both warning about it and then sounding the all clear signal in March 2009, that anyone really started taking me seriously. Like I recall doing the episode of Kudlow on CNBC when the Business Week forecast came out. There's a funny story about that. So a buddy does it every year, and for whatever reason, he couldn't do it one year. Maybe he was in between firms and didn't want to participate. So he introduced me to the editor, and I had not that long earlier written a piece in TheStreet.com, I want to say 2004, called The Folly of Forecast, and explain why nobody gets these things consistently right, and the world is too random, and 12 months out, like so many random things can happen in a given year. Hypothetically, a pandemic, or the Fed raising rates 500 basis points, or the Russian invasion of Ukraine, or the war between Hamas and Israel. Like, nobody expected those things, and so your forecasts are completely derailed. And so I pitched the then editor of Business Week, when it was owned by McGraw-Hill, hey, why don't we do a little counter-programming and opposite all these forecasts, explain why forecast is folly and no one really knows and blah, blah, blah. And I'll never forget her answer. She said, look, it's a big double issue. We sell a shit ton of ads. You want to participate or not? So I'm like, sure. And I had written a piece for TheStreet.com called Cult of the Bear that explained Reinhardt and Rogoff, two very famous economists who study financial crises, had a short paper out describing what happens when you have a leverage-based financial crisis. And there were 5 examples. The U.S. in 1929, Japan, Mexico, Helsinki. I never remember the 5th one. And one of the takeaways was real estate, which is normally pretty steady, in a financial crisis driven by debt, falls about 30% in price. 30%? That's giant. So I ran an analysis and said, let's look what happens to the Dow if real estate falls 30%. And the number I came up with was 6,800. So I was kind of, and by the way, that wasn't a forecast. That was just, hey, if these guys are right and this financial crisis that we're in the early days of unwinds and real estate drops 30%, expect the Dow to go from 13.5, 14,000 down to 6,800. So I'm like, you know what? A double issue? Great. I'm going to use these numbers just to throw it in. And so everybody is all clustered up here, and all the way down at the bottom is Barry. And I go on Kudlow the week after it comes out, and that's all he wants to talk about. And I was his whipping boy for a solid year. And then by the end of 07, stuff starts to roll over, and then into 08. And then all of a sudden, I'm on Kudlow every week, twice a week, 3 times a week, like the guy who saw it coming. And it was like, hey, listen, I don't really believe in making forecasts. This was just a what if. Let's war game this scenario. That, one of the things within the book is try and think probabilistically. Don't think in terms of binary. Hey, it's a bull or a bear. We're going up, we're going down. Try and think of what are the various possibilities that can happen. If you want to put a rough 10% chance of this and 20% chance of that and 30% chance of this and then 20 and then 10. If you want to think of it that way, hey, well, then you're preparing yourself for all manner of outcome, as opposed to you're either going to be wildly right or wildly wrong. That's not really a whole lot of use to anybody, those binary forecasts. You're much better. It's like when you go for a drive to a place you don't know. Well, here's one route, and if there's traffic, I'll go that route, and here's my plan C. Having that in your head, well, now we all have GPS in it, your phone or your car automatically reroutes you, but, not thinking about the world in terms of coin flips, but here's an array of possibilities.
That's a different, forecasts aren't incentivized to do that. Right? For media or even for active investors, the binary, it's the same in political media and pop culture media. Creating controversy, or in this case, creating binary, makes it a little easier to understand, a little more black and white. But you've never been a fan of that. You've never done it. But that's what gets the clicks. That's what gets the ratings. That's what makes then the money, especially for media, which needs advertising, and that needs eyeballs to stay on it. So that's why it's always been, it seems to me, the obvious way to handle it, to do it that way. It's having several different outcomes, you only have 2.
So there's two responses to that. One is all forecasts are marketing, plain and simple. You don't need to make a forecast. You don't need to make a prediction. It's not a game. It's not a spin of the wheel. It's not a casino. Why do you have to? And to the the old joke is why do economists use 2 decimal places to prove they have a sense of humor? But the other thing is, whenever I give a presentation in front of a room, one of the questions I love to ask is, what does media sell? And people always say advertising. No, you guys have it backwards. They sell you. Advertisers are the buyers. They're buying your time, attention, and today, cross-reference with the internet, your shopping history, your credit score, your all these other things. But you're the product that is being sold to the buyers. They're the advertisers. And so, of course, shit is outrageous. Of course, there's an endless amount of clickbait. And that's before we start talking about algorithmic social media that has perfected the use of A/B testing and iteration to create the greatest amount of engagement. And the way they do that is outrage and emotional enthusiasm and just pushing your hot buttons. If you're ever on Twitter or Facebook and you start to get angry, hey, that's not an accident. That is by design. If we could stimulate your fight or flight response, we'll hold your attention. You know, we'll have the advertisers have more eyeballs see them. It's really an insidious, terrible business model. And the reason it's around for this long is because it's so damn lucrative.
Exactly. So damn lucrative. Let's go to part 2 of the book. It's Bad Numbers, Economic Innumeracy, Market Mayhem, Stock Shocks. And I like this. The whole book is kind of written in the same way that we always talk, the way that you talk with me, the way that you talk with anybody, using behavior, using research, using examples, anecdotes, and experiments to explain why we think the way we think, why we do what we do, and obviously end up in our behavior when it comes to investment. But this is probably the hardest one for me to understand because it gets a little bit more wonky in Bad Numbers. What do you want to say about this section of the book? Again, bad ideas, bad numbers, bad behavior, and finally, good advice. We're at Bad Numbers. What do you want to say about this section?
So the most important thing people should know is the power of compounding. And I use a couple of examples to show that, but my favorite is 2 guys go off to World War I in 1917, and they each have a small fortune. One has $1,000. They both have $1,000. One of these 2 guys buries it in mason jars in the backyard and hides a note for his family to find it if he doesn't come, in an envelope to be opened on my death. And the other invests it into the stock market. 100 years later, the family, the first guy, finds the note, and they go open the mason jars, and it's $1,000. And what's $1,000 worth today compared to a century ago? Less than 5% of its original value. $1,000 100 years ago buy you a house, could buy you a horse, could buy you a farm. Now, you know, it buys you a nice tasting menu at a good sushi place, maybe some clothes or a decent bicycle, but not a whole lot more. And if you, the guy who put $1,000 into the stock market in 1917, when I tell people, hey, what do you think this is worth a century later? Oh, it's got to be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Hey, it was $1,000. What's it worth today? $1 million? And you tell people $32 million, their heads explode. And that's the power of compounding. So the biggest lesson from the bad numbers section is try not to interfere with the market's ability to compound. Every time you get in the way, every time you buy this, sell that, because you heard somebody on TV, or every time you let me just step out of the market till we get some clarity, again, because you read something that somebody said, you're interfering with the market's compounding ability. And just don't. You're not smarter than the market. Listen, I don't know a lot of people who got the financial crisis more right at the top and more right at the bottom than me. I don't want to manage money that way because I can't tell, was I lucky? Was I skillful? Was it just good timing? I don't know. I honestly can say, I went on TV the day before the market lows in March 2009. It was a coincidence that the way the school schedule worked out that year, I was on vacation with my wife, who's a teacher. So we got home Sunday night. When we broke 10,000 on the way down, I said to a buddy, hey, if we get anywhere near close 6,800, don't let me be that asshole that doubles down and says 3,400. Because, I've witnessed that time and again. Like, you have permission to kick my ass if I do anything like that. So I get home from vacation on Sunday, and the first person who calls is like, dude, I know you're away, but we're spitting distance of 6,800. In fact, I think we were just past it. So I'm like, I'm ahead of you. I wrote up my note. Hey, this is what I wrote 2.5, 3 years ago. Every measure of sentiment, valuation, money flows, they're as extreme negative as they get. When the crowd turns into an ugly mob, I want to be on the other side of that trade. Cover your shorts and go long. I sent that out. I want to say it was Sunday night. And then I get a phone call or an email from Henry Blodgett. Come on, you want to talk about this? Come on Yahoo TV tomorrow. Henry had built a Business Insider and was a famous Wall Street hooligan himself. And so I went on and I said, cover your shorts, go long. And then the next day, the market bottomed and took off. And it was dumb luck. If the calendar was different, I would have said the same thing. A month earlier, a month later, it didn't matter. But through that dumb luck, I more or less got it right. And we run $5-point-something billion. I don't want to sling billions of dollars around based on my gut that morning. I mean, that's just insane. But that's what a lot of people do.
Plenty of people do it. By the way, a keen listener will realize that you've mentioned at least 3 times vacations. It sounds like everything, every one of your anecdotes says, I had just gotten back from vacation. When are you not getting back from vacation?
So, fair question. Again, when your wife's a teacher, you are stuck on the school calendar. So you're traveling the worst times of year. You're traveling with everybody else's kids, and places are crowded. And
wish I had a violin soundtrack for you.
But I will also point out that most of my adult life, we didn't really go on vacations. It was I only want to say it's the past, once I turned late 40s, I started to have a little bit of scratch to put together to be able to afford to go on vacation.
Well, your wife, a teacher, you guys don't have kids, and you have done well, and I'm just busting your chops. I don't want to get off the book. When bad ideas don't die, you write, people love experts to tell us what's going to happen in the future. Never mind that the forecasting track record is awful. We prefer the mysticism of the television guru to our own actual thinking. Here's something that should give you pause. The more confident an expert sounds on TV, the more likely he is to be believed by viewers. And the more self-confident they seem, the worse their track record likely is. Forecasters who got one big outlier correct are more likely to make bolder predictions in the future that tend to be wrong. I love this because I think it applies not only to financial advice and financial media, but certainly to political media and other. You also write about not knowing things. And I started my career in radio by telling the boss of political programming at Sirius, he told me, you got to stop saying, I don't know, Pete. And I thought, no, that's the whole appeal. I want to be the opposite of all these assholes who know everything about everything. The power of I don't know actually builds credibility, is the truth.
100%. They misnamed your original show on Sirius. It should have been I Don't Know with Pete Dominick, right? Because the whole theme of your show was, I don't know, but let me bring an expert in who I can ask questions of, and he can help educate me and my listeners. And so I was always a fan of that concept. In Wall Street, there is very much this fake it till you make it sort of attitude. And most of the big houses have training programs, and the first week of your training program is modern portfolio theory and asset allocation and how to build a bond ladder and blah, blah, blah. And that's the first week. And then the next 51 weeks for the rest of your training year is sales training. And it's all about listening to the customer, being self-confident, and attempting to sell a product that addresses, notice that's the word address, not solve, addresses their needs. And so if you have to be self-confident, considering you're a green newbie, fake it till you make it is a really useful technique if you want to put up good sales numbers. The flip side of that is a lot of what we do in finance requires you to be humble, to admit how little you actually know. It's not just about what's happening in the future. We know very little about what's going on right here and now. And to acknowledge that, to acknowledge the role of luck and serendipity, to acknowledge how little we actually know about today and even less about tomorrow, is very in opposite versus the way so many people came up in finance. And so I wanted to hammer that home. I love the examples in the beginning of the book, Squid Game and John Wick and the Beatles and just all the films that the studios passed on. You shouldn't feel bad for not knowing something. And I reference the Enron CEO and chairman berating an analyst who had the temerity in a call to say, wait, I don't understand your business model. Are you telling me that you signed 10-year contracts and instead of recognizing the revenue in each year, you accelerate it and recognize it all in 1 year, in year one? How does that work? And they just yelled at him. You're so stupid. How do you not understand it? Actually, he was really smart and figured out that Enron was a fraud and asked them in public. And, this was before anyone had an inkling that they were a fraud, that it was all accounting gimmicks. But he was like, this doesn't make sense. I've been trained to understand this stuff. So my answer has always been, if you don't understand something, say, I don't really understand this. Can you explain this to me? And if a company or an investment fund doesn't want to explain it to you, they're not worth your time or your money, and move on.
What was the name of the investor played by Christian Bale in The Big Short?
Michael Burry.
He's an example of being smart, watching something and realizing it doesn't make sense against all the rest of much of the rest of the industry. I feel like I'm thinking of somebody else like that.
No, that's the right guy. And every Michael Lewis character, I've been lucky enough to interview him a bunch of times.
Yeah, no, did you know that?
What's it?
You got a new book out with a bunch of different writers.
Who is Government?
Who is Government? That's right.
Right. So I just had him on the podcast last week, and I'm doing a live interview with him April 7th in Washington.
Oh, very good. Let's do about part 3 of your book.
Sure.
Time. It's called Bad Behavior, Avoidable Mistakes, Emotional Decision-Making, Cognitive Deficits. What do you want to say? What's the most important takeaway here? Give us an example of what we learned in part 3.
Sure. So the emotional, I'll give you a quick one of each. The emotional side is obvious. We evolved to adapt on the savannah to challenging conditions. We have neither fang nor claws nor armor. We're chewy and delicious. And so we have to work cooperatively to stay alive as a species. And that has led us to certain subroutines and emotional responses. Fight or flight is built into us. Bill Bernstein famously said, your fight or flight response, your amygdala, is part of your limbic system. Your success as an investor is determined by your ability to control your limbic system. Fail to control that fight or flight response, fail to control your limbic system, and you will die poor, is a quote in the book. And so that's a key thing, is the way we react emotionally is for an imminent threat that is an existential risk right then or there. And you have to decide, can I do battle and hold my own? Should I run away? That is the wrong approach when the market gets volatile. You're trying to pick a muni bond fund when you're deploying capital. Reacting fast and emotionally is simply a poor substitute for thoughtful, contemplative decision-making that carefully measures what we know, what are the risks, what am I giving up by doing this, what is my potential upside, as opposed to running around with your hair on fire. So that's the
decision-making. What's avoidable mistakes?
So I tell a story in the book of, I call it the billionaire trifecta from hell.
Right.
Got a family, long story, but they're very successful. One of them ends up starting with an oil company, which eventually gets bought by Houston Gas and Oil, which later changes its name to Enron. And they're managing their own portfolios, and because he's on the board, because the son is on the board of directors of Enron, when the news starts going bad, he hangs on and rides $2 billion worth of Enron down to zero, which seems insane. And then he rolls out and says, maybe I should get some help. And because they were a Jewish family in New York, active in philanthropy, eventually they met a guy. It was inevitable they were going to meet some guy named Bernie Madoff. And so, of course, that goes to hell. And they're like, you know what? I've kind of had it with all these stocks and stuff. And so they roll into FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried. Like, talk about. And by the way, they're fine. So the Madoff recovery was about 95% of whatever money you gave them. The FTX recovery was like 115%. You actually did better. And they still have enough money. They're fine. If you go to the north wing of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, that's the Belfer statue wing and gallery.
The family that you're talking
about.
So
they're okay. And they've been very generous with a lot of colleges and a lot of arts and a lot of hospitals. So they're fine, but nobody wants to lose $2 billion.
I was pretty worried about them when I started reading that chapter. It's like, I hope they're all right. You never mentioned that they're fine in that chapter.
Yes.
So people miss that out, but I'm so glad. I was like, oh my God.
Literally a footnote. They'll be okay. You'll see.
Have millions of dollars after all these avoidable mistakes that you
So can you do it yourself? Do you have the skill set? Yes, but you have to be disciplined and you have to have a plan. Should you trust somebody else? Yes, but only if they're a fiduciary and are legally obligated to put your interests first. And third, do you want to try this wacky new product? Hey, it's a crapshoot. You're rolling the dice.
I'm out of time, but I want to do more on this book. I'd love to host a live chat. And
sure, let's do that.
A book chat. Anybody who buys the book can join us. How Not to Invest. Go get it right now. Barry's joined us for years. This is his second big book, and we're real excited for it and for you. And I hope it's a bestseller. And
so far, so good. Number one on Amazon in stocks and investing. So
there you go.
Yeah, at least in terms of new releases. So I'm excited about that. It's very gratifying.
You would not be able to get a new watch, but it looks like you should be okay. A lot of people were worried about Ritholtz, the Belfers, Ritholtz. Thank you very much, my friend. Awesome as always.
My pleasure. Anytime, Pete.
And we'll get to conclusions the next time. That'll be part two. There'll be many parts of this interview.